Everyone's so quiet. I'm just doing some work up here. I'm almost ready. Okay, welcome back. We have changed the order of things from the schedule a little bit because originally to make sure that we could get in the FTC commissioners later, but they're not going to be here, so we're still going to do this panel now, and then we'll have the keynote after this. So the title of the panel is How Many Gs Do We Need, and Does the US Need to Be First? So the discussion of 5G in this country and elsewhere has become is a foundation on which we built the discussions for lots of other things. So it's not just a new network, a new technology. It has to do with now cybersecurity and innovation, digital divides, overall competitiveness, sort of any issue that we are facing in the country, somebody's going to say, well, 5G is going to come along and it'll solve it, or what are we going to do with 5G? It's not going to get to everybody, and so on. So lots of questions with 5G. It's been part of the Huawei discussion, and so on. And then there are the other questions that go along with this, the sort of more technical and market questions. Will 5G be a substitute for wireline networks? And the wireline networks also being upgraded quickly. Cable calls its 10G system, which is gigabit networks and higher. To what extent are these networks complements, and to what extent are they substitutes? How do companies decide, who have both, decide what they want to invest in? What are some of the risks that we're building, that we're creating in building these 5G networks? So we have a great panel to discuss all of these things. I will just introduce them their panelists very, very quickly, so we can start. So starting on my left, we have Rob Alderfer, who is the Vice President of Technology Policy at Cable Labs. Donna Epps, yes, to his left, is the Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Strategic Alliances for Verizon. And there's Dale Hatfield, Executive Fellow at the Silicon Flatiron Center for Law, Technology, and Entrepreneurship, and also an adjunct professor in the Interdisciplinary Telecommunications Program. Tom Hazlett, who is the Macaulay Endowed Chair in Economics at Clemson University. And I noticed the color of your sports coat is getting a little bit darker over time. Yesterday, I couldn't even look at you. And last but not least, Catherine Ross, who is Group Regulatory Affairs Director at BT, and she's held many commissioner-type positions in the UK. So why don't we start with sort of a discussion and descriptions of what is the state of 5G in the US and elsewhere? And maybe, Donna, if you want to maybe talk a little about what Verizon has done and where you guys are, and then Rob maybe follow up with the state of cable networks.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me here. Mm-hmm. I think the state of 5G is things are going very well. The industry has made incredible progress. By the end of this year, we'll have 5G commercial deployments across America. Lots of good news to report. The U.S. is in the lead when it comes to 5G, and we're very proud that Verizon, we were the first company on April 3rd to deploy commercial mobile 5G. We did that in Chicago and Indianapolis, and so that was terrific. But even before that, last October, we deployed fixed wireless 5G in 4 cities. So I think the state of things are strong. Globally, the competition is fierce. I know this crowd knows that. We have China nipping at our heels. CTIA came out with a study in the spring that showed that, yes, we're in the lead, but some believe we're neck and neck with China, and then we have South Korea and Japan coming up fast. So lots of good progress made, largely too, and I want to give a shout out to policymakers at the federal, state, and local level for a lot of great policies to help streamline the infrastructure deployment process, to make sure that we have sufficient spectrum, particularly the millimeter wave spectrum, which we are using to deploy our initial rollout. So lots of good policies that have facilitated this, but there's a lot more work to do, particularly in the spectrum field, and I'm sure we'll get to that a little later on, but I think that the state of 5G is strong.
Rob?
Sure. So thanks, Scott, for having me. This is the panel of the Gs, 5G and 10G. Let me talk a little bit about what we're doing with 10G in the cable world. When we talk about 10G, essentially what we're doing is planting a flag, and that flag means 10 gigabits per second. That's what we're aiming for in the cable industry. And we can talk about that because we're confident we can get there. Today's cable networks are fully gigabit capable. Just to give you some numbers around that, across the United States, 93% plus of cable networks are gigabit capable now. So that's a big step increase from just a year or two ago, really pretty significant progress. And that same technology that's out there and deployed today that's enabling gigabit access is scalable to multi-gig and even to 10 gigs. Future generations that are in development now will allow that capacity to be symmetrical. So upstream and downstream speeds will both be 10G ready. And so that's essentially the future we're aiming for. And as we look to that future, we're informed by history. And the history of the internet, if you observe the top speeds available in the market over the last 20 years or so, they've increased by 50% year on year. So that's an observation known as Nielsen's law. Of course, it is not a law. It is an observation. It's not a given either. But we see a need for 10G networks in the not too distant future. And essentially, that's what we're building the technology to enable our members to deploy in the cable industry. So that's essentially what we're talking about when we talk about 10G. And we're pretty excited about that future for the cable broadband networks.
Catherine, what's different in the UK, even in terms of rhetoric or actual build-out?
Yeah, I'm not sure the rhetoric is that different. I think the whole idea of 5G and also sort of fiber gigabit capable fixed line is seen very much as sort of emblematic of the extent to which the UK is going to keep pace with being one of the world's sort of leading digital economies. So a lot of the rhetoric is very much about what kind of economy and society do we want to be, and seeing investment in fiber and 5G is absolutely critical to that. I think in terms of where we are in 5G right now, I mean, I think we are among the leading countries in the world. We at BT launched our 5G service in 6 cities back in June. Vodafone, one of our principal competitors, launched in 7 cities around the same time. And I think we're all planning on doing a further sort of 10 cities or so in the next 12 months. So that's pretty typical. In terms of full fiber rollout, I think the perception is very much that the UK is falling behind in terms of full fiber connectivity. And it's kind of interesting to unpack that a bit, because what happened in the UK was we invested a lot, and we at BT invested a lot in what's called superfast broadband. So essentially VDSL technology that is providing right now more than about 95% of homes in the UK with more than 30 meg. So if you measure that kind of technology, we are massively ahead. In fact, we are the leading country in Europe on that measurement. But actually, if you're measuring full fiber, then we are pretty much near the bottom of the full fiber rollout in Europe. So there is a bit of a vexed debate going on about the UK's position as one of the leading digital economies, and a lot of it depends on what measure you're looking at.
So now let me sort of take it in a different direction. The assumption in most 5G and 10G discussions is that we have to get there as fast as possible, if not faster, and that here that the US has to be first, and probably in every country, that country has to be first. But what is the optimal speed of transition? I mean, that's an impossible question to answer because nobody knows what the optimal speed is, but we have a huge installed network. It's costly to transition, both in terms of investments required by the carriers and people who use it. Is it necessarily the case that the that the country that has the first full network, is the one that leads the technology or that has the greatest benefits over time.
So I think it's incredibly important that we are first. The country that's first is really going to shape the entire 5G ecosystem. We saw what happened. The US was clearly first in 4G. Not necessarily the case in 2G or 3G, but we saw the incredible benefits to consumers and US companies by us being first in 4G. We were able to shape the ecosystem. We were able to have the birth of the sharing economy, and a lot of, whether it's Facebook or Uber, et cetera, a lot of the innovation and growth started here and was shaped by the US companies because we were first. And I think the same thing is true with 5G. 5G is going to enable greater enhancements to things like augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, Internet of Things, et cetera. And to the extent that we want to, reap all the benefits, both the economic benefits, and I would also say it's not just an economic imperative, but I think it's also a national security imperative. The country that's first is really going to shape the ecosystem, and the rest of the world will be literally trying to catch up. So I think it is important.
Tom?
Yeah, we were talking earlier at this conference about measurement problems. Well, one of the advantages of 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G is that measurement seems a lot simpler. So it has a resonance politically to say that we're stuck in 4G, we're going to 5G. Of course, the experts in this audience will know that there actually is a measurement issue, and there's the G wars in part are allegations almost like Crocodile Dundee. That's not a knife. So that's not 5G, that's 4.8G. And actually, I'm going to give a shout out and a kudo to the regulators in the US and some other places, but particularly here we see that there is flexibility. And so there are deployments taking place sort of at their own speed, not constrained by some of the limitations and allocational issues. And in fact, 1990s regulators got out some licensed rights that ended up after the dot-com boom in the wireless graveyard and kicked around in bankruptcy for a while. And now the reason we're talking about 5G going well in the US is that those flexible use permits have been reimagined, and in fact, that's very valuable. On the other side of that, we have some real constraints, particularly with something called 3.5 gigahertz that the United States clearly has fallen behind because we've pursued a regulatory path that involves what I would call micromanagement and a real lack of understanding about how some of our successes have taken place. I think that in terms of having a clear goal and racing to 5G, that's an organizing principle. People understand it politically. All great spectator sports, to me, seem to have scoreboards that are easily understood, whether it be U.S. basketball or Australian rules football, which I recently tried to understand but gave up. But the scoreboard's there. We have a 5G scoreboard. We want to move forward. I think that the key there is to allow progress, not constrain the progress. Sometimes when people have these conversations, I like to say to people, well, we lost 2G. Are you still reeling from that? In fact, that was an interesting strategic situation. The European community got together and industrial policy pushed the 2G standard. The United States sort of dilly-dallied getting those licenses and the spectrum allocation out. Did fall behind. The Europeans pushed by regulators who wanted that industrial policy, jumped out, and they dominated the second generation for digital wireless. And yet the US allowing more flexibility, making some mistakes in spectrum allocation by being a little slow, but allowing more flexibility, came up with the technologies that, in essence, salvaged 3G, 4G, and now 5G technology. So it's not really the winning, but it is the organizing of political will to clear out barriers, to get spectrum allocated in an expeditious and rational fashion that really is the opportunity.
Dale, I know you have concerns.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not so sanguine. It certainly is, 5G is certainly an interesting, exciting technological development. But I think there's some pretty serious dangers in overhyping it. And what I thought I would do is talk about 4 of my primary concerns, and then perhaps I can expand on if there's interest or whatever. But my 4 concerns go like this. 1, unlike wired networks, those based upon fiber or coax, wireless networks like 5G are inherently open to malicious and non-malicious jamming, spoofing, and sniffing attacks that reduce network resiliency. So when we have scoreboards, we must take into account some of the other, what may be externalities. This is fundamental, that I can put a receiver in a copper cage and I can keep the bad guys out. But if I keep the bad guys out, unfortunately, I do what? I keep the good signals out too. So wireless is inherently open to these type of attacks. So as we shift from the more wired network to a wireless network, we're opening ourselves up to certain vulnerabilities, and it's part of the trade-off we have to make. Secondly, the reliance on a single standardized technology like 5G, capable of sort of connecting everything to everyone to everywhere in order to achieve economies of scale and scope. I think that's what's driving that. What we invite is the problem, the dangers associated with monocultures. And if you think about the Irish potato famine and the devastating consequences it had for whole populations, for tremendous implications, what we're doing here is a monoculture. And so you have to be careful in a monoculture environment that you don't provide opportunities that can take large segments of the network down. In other words, what I'm talking about, biodiversity. We have biodiversity, and we kind of need to think about diversity here as well, which may go against economies of scale and scope. My third point is hype is not a victimless crime. Now, I said that, and wait a minute, that's too inflammatory. But it's not, overhyping 5G is not victimless, because it can cause economic costs to society. And I'll go through 4 of those things. 1, by stimulating uneconomic investments in both the private and the public sectors. Second, it can distort critical decisions in terms of research funding and publishing priorities. If you want to get in a good IEEE magazine, you got to put 5G AI, you know what to be able to get it. And I'm afraid it affects this research decisions too. Third, it incentivizes unnecessary removal or suspensions of environmental and similar regulations. So when we start talking about streamlining installation of cell sites, for example, we pay a price when we say 5G is so important that we'll get around environmental regulations or historical site things as well. And then perhaps most controversy, the fourth one, is inspiring the premature reallocation of the spectrum through auctions or otherwise before 5G use cases are really proven. 4G can do an awful lot of this. In fact, 5G is heavily built upon 4G. So there's a certain risk I think we're taking. The fourth, and I'll wrap up, is Chairman Pai, as you probably noticed last week, described a draft item indicating that the Commission intends to maintain its existing radio frequency or RF exposure limits. I still think that's a bit of an elephant in the room. At the same time, the draft item was described to great sighs of relief. The FDA updated its website to say, and I quote, "There is a consensus that additional research is warranted to address gaps in knowledge, such as the effects of cell phone use over the long term and on pediatric populations." Now, by overhyping here, saying these cell sites are going to be everywhere, they're going to be right outside your window and all this sort of stuff. What are we doing? We're creating a lot of people thinking about this, which is good in some ways, but unless we do a very good job of making sure the public, it goes back to what several people have talked, comes back to trust, right? Do we trust our government and so forth in terms of the RF exposure issue? So I think it was a big step that was taken, but I don't honestly think that the public is going to accept it quite as easily as some of us might hope.
Okay, the gauntlet was laid down. Anybody want to respond?
A couple things, and I don't purport to be a cybersecurity expert here, but my understanding is, first of all, it's a more complex technology, and so obviously, there are a lot of threats that we are mindful of. We take security very seriously, and one of the things that, my understanding is that 5G really is a step forward when it comes to network security. It leverages a lot of the security tools from 4G, and it builds on them. So for example, 5G has more sophisticated encryption features than some of the earlier technologies. For example, it has a security edge protection proxy that prevents threats from less secure interconnected networks from harming 5G networks. Now, that doesn't mean, like every other technology, the bad guys are going to be out there gunning for this. And so we have over 1,000 cybersecurity professionals that we employ, and we will have to continue to diligently monitor and respond to threats as they arise. But the reality is that though 5G will provide a different and enhanced and improved customer experience, it's really just an evolution of the secure, reliable 4G networks that we already have in place that we will continue to have to be diligent on. But the 5G standards, as I understand it, do provide for secure transport between different network elements and the existing networks. That said, I think Dale's caution is well taken, and there are lots of folks, lots of federal agencies, DHS and others that are very focused on that, and we are focused on that as well. I would say that with respect to the overhyping, I think it is, it's the case that part of the reason it can appear it's overhyping is because we don't really know all of the use cases that will be available. And we do believe that the various capabilities of 5G is something that will support the ushering in of the fourth industrial revolution. So there will be a lot of different use cases yet to be determined yet. And it's one of the reasons that I think more experimentation and collaboration are important. research and development budgets being what they are, I think the point is well taken about making sure you don't misallocate resources. But I think there's a lot that the private sector is doing right now in terms of collaborating with vendors and startups and other companies, universities. We have 5G labs around the country where we're really experimenting with what's possible. So I think until we realize some of those use cases, it does appear, it can appear as though there's overhyping, but I actually think that just as we could not have imagined a lot of the use cases that evolved with 4G, we're going to look back and feel the same way about 5G. And clearly, we need to balance competing policy interests. There are competing policy interests when you look at environmental reviews that are necessary, and we look at the local and state officials who have their interests in making sure that small cells are deployed in a way that doesn't threaten their communities or the aesthetics of their communities. But I do think it's important that we have a balanced approach to these issues. Just with every new technology, there's a lot of, concern and fear-mongering. I think on the RF point, all I would say about that is that, we follow what the FCC standards are, and we are not scientists. We look to the FCC and FDA and others to determine what the science says, and we will follow the RF safety guidelines that are there. But, this is the same RF emissions that are in baby monitors and Wi-Fi routers and garage openers. And so I think that it's a serious issue that scientists need to continue to study, and we will follow whatever the FCC and federal agencies determine the state of the science is.
Let's go to this question about Huawei. Randy Bicker asks, what should be the posture of the U.S. government regarding Huawei, and how does that relate to international competition over 5G? So, what are, I guess the question is, what is BT doing with Huawei equipment, and and how does that compare to what U.S. networks are doing? And in the U.S., how does that affect an ability to lead in rollout for anybody who needs to build new network equipment if we can't use one of the major providers?
Well, shall I kick off with what's happening in the UK? So BT is in a pretty good position on Huawei, to the extent that we have long had a policy across BT of not using Huawei equipment in the core, and we don't. So from that point of view, we have relatively less of an issue than some others. However, having said that, it is certainly true that when we acquired EE, which is one of the biggest UK mobile networks, we did acquire a network that does use Huawei in the RAN, and we are pursuing a policy of removing Huawei equipment in line with the general BT policy, removing it from the EE core. I think one of the big issues we have, though, is that in recent years it has been undeniably the case that Huawei has been a technological leader in respect of some of the equipment that we're using, for example, in 4G and 5G. We do have that stuff in the network. And not only has it been a technological leader, it's also enabled some greater competition on price and availability of kit. So there's been absolutely no argument, I think, from us that Huawei has brought benefits into the UK in terms of our ability to roll out good quality connectivity, to do it at a reasonable pace and to do it at a reasonable price. Now, in terms of going forward, we have very good processes in place in the UK to manage the risk that is seen as being around Huawei equipment. So many of you will be familiar with the National Cybersecurity Centre that exists in Banbury. And before any Huawei kit can be installed and used in any of the UK networks, the kit goes through the National Cybersecurity Centre and it is tested for any evidence of undesirable software or indeed hardware that is in that kit. And then that is coupled with some real-life testing of the kit that is installed in the network. So, we accept that there is seen to be a risk around the use of Huawei. We think in the UK we've got some good processes and procedures in there to manage that. And I think our view would be that the benefits of having Huawei as part of the network, coupled with the ability to manage that risk in a proportionate way, gives us potentially a way forward. That said, there are a set of decisions that will be taken way above my pay grade, and whatever those decisions are, we will implement them. But I think the main focus in the UK right now is around realizing that those who make those decisions need to be aware of the trade-offs, because they can take a particular approach in terms of wishing to see Huawei removed from the network, and that is certainly possible to implement, but it is not possible to implement immediately with no impact on price and pace of rollout. So,
So the UK, for as long as it continues to exist, I guess, decided that Huawei equipment, the report you're talking about said that a lot of their software was buggy and sloppy, but that it wasn't necessary, it wasn't anything that couldn't deal with.
Yeah.
Whereas the US sort of came to a different decision. And I don't know if maybe Dale, if you have thoughts on that, how that fits in, is it better for the US to keep out this equipment given the risks that you've identified? And Rob, I mean, this kind of equipment is important in cable networks too. And how does that affect, how does that affect our ability to compete relative to countries that will use this equipment?
I want to be very cautious here about driving beyond my headlights. That question is so complex and gets into the technical details that I'm not capable of doing. Instinctively, I would say, I always get a little concerned when you're keeping out competitors. It doesn't feel quite right to me. But on the other hand, if the real technical gurus and the details of that determine that there is a threat, then obviously, from a national security standpoint, I think you have to go the other way.
So I might have a somewhat unique perspective on this issue on the panel. And I just want to come at it not from the perspective of any one company, but from the perspective of US-led innovation. If you look at the cable industry and where innovation happens, it's centered around cable labs. We're based here in Colorado. That's pretty unique. We have a bunch of great engineers that staff cable labs, of course, but what's really powerful about the cable innovation model is we bring everyone together from around the world, vendors, operators. There's one playing field for innovation in cable, and that's cable labs. So what I worry about, again, not specific to any one company, is if we start questioning the ability of foreign vendors to collaborate on technology development. This is well before product, okay? I'm not talking about products that are implemented in networks. I'm talking about common technology development. I worry about creating new playing fields that ultimately won't serve the interests of Americans or other consumers around the world. And I just want to come back to the observation I kicked off with, because this point is related to the rapid deployment of gigabit networks here in the US. We've seen rapid deployment of networks because of this collaborative innovation model that we have in the cable industry. And so this also relates to the points around America being first to 5G or 10G. We, in fact, are first to roll out 10G networks here in the US, again, with the gigabit networks that are in the ground today. That's something that I think everyone in this room would like to see continue as we continue this march to 10G.
Donna, it's a little unfair to ask you about this question because
fine.
it's. But I mean, how does this place Verizon?
So,
it's a tough problem.
We've long had some concerns about the Chinese technology, so we do not use Huawei, ZTE, or any Chinese technologies in our network, not in 4G, not in 5G. We don't have any plans to, so we've had some concerns around that.
Yeah, if I can pin that on. Sure, the panel that we actually replaced, a lot of the members of that panel had the term honorable as a descriptor, but they took that off for us, so that gives me free rein here. Yeah, the deployment issue is a little different than the technology issue. But it's hard to see where exactly the U.S. policy is on this. It would be actually quite helpful if there were factual, empirical investigations, whether they be in legal courts or regulatory agencies that really documented what the problems were with the security issues. And instead, what I see, and I will say the Federal Trade Commission has pursued a suit against an American 5G technology firm, Qualcomm, which I'm not working for, and I do own, in disclosure, a few shares of Qualcomm, but I'm mystified by that case, in which a lot of the winning court case by the U.S. government against Qualcomm for exploiting its intellectual property some way that's thought to violate antitrust. A lot of that comes from assertions by Huawei. And I think the U.S. government got the case wrong, but it mystifies me that we are, in this, multi-dimensional path, seemingly going in many conflicting directions on how we're trying to organize the 5G technology, how we're trying to assert antitrust law over companies here and abroad that are, in fact, on this path and making great contributions. So I think rationalization would be appropriate there, and I do read that the Department of Justice may actually be providing some diversity of opinion on this, and that we may, in the United States, kind of rectify this. I really don't think the problem is, one of China eating our lunch. I do think that we have other issues that we can focus on here that, in fact, would reinforce and open up markets, and in fact allow technology companies, including companies like Qualcomm, sometimes called a patent assertion entity, extremely efficient at in terms of global competition, and in fact creating new technology in a way that does rely on the patent system, and that we have kind of gotten away from understanding the efficiency of that system. Obviously, all legal regimes like this, particularly ones that do allow property rights, and some would say monopoly rights over technology, they have to be finely honed and crafted and not overly broad. And so there's always a balancing there. But I think that the balance actually has gotten away from us in terms of our understanding. So I would think that we have a lot of work to do here. I would also just say one thing on the path of being dishonorable, and that is Dale raises some obviously very important and challenging points, but the idea of waiting on spectrum allocations until business models are developed, I think, partly from reading some of Dale's excellent work over the years, that's the wrong path. And we don't know what those business models are. In 3G, we didn't know about the App Store when the allocations were made. And the flexibility in the marketplace allowed us to discover how literally millions of applications could come in and be regulated and coordinated and run through a very, very congested and interfering shared spectrum space through those flexible property rights. So I think that the future is there, but entirely unknowable, mostly unknowable until we, in fact, do allow entry. And in fact, the United States, in some respects, has allowed entry in a very wise way, and that's how we're going to discover the future.
So what are we getting wrong, right?
Can I respond? I can't help it. These meetings, quite rightly, focus on wireless, the big market for wireless here in the country. But there is an awful lot of use of spectrum for lots of other purposes that are not represented here. And I think we almost have a little bit of public choice theory going on here a little bit. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned by the fact that you say, well, we can keep this spectrum, hold it to see if the market works out. when there are some other technologies, let's say like improving radars, would be a big way of freeing up spectrum. Are we actually, I think there's a cost, I think there's a cost to waiting if you don't consider some of the other applications that are out there that are not necessarily wireless 5G offerings.
No doubt there's a cost both ways.
Wait, I want to hear more about this. So Dale, are you saying that spectrum licenses should not necessarily always be fully flexible in terms of their use?
Oh, gosh. Oh, I think they should be. I'm absolutely in favor of flexible licensing. There may be some cases where but my instinct is always towards flexible licensing. But I doubt if Verizon's going to come up with a new way of doing remote sensing or something like that, passive from the sky. I mean, you can do a lot, but there are limitations on some of the things you do, and some of those technologies, remote sensing and so forth, can be very, very passive systems, if you will, can be very important scientifically and even economically.
Yeah, and let me just clarify, I don't think, we certainly haven't taken the position that, 5G is going to be the be-all, end-all in every circumstance. I mean, certainly, we haven't talked about the digital divide yet, but
Right,
there are,
we should get there, yeah.
there will be room for and a need for a variety of different types of technology, low Earth, orbital technologies. There are certainly, I mean, we've advocated for the need to protect incumbents from interference. When we talk about the C-band, we just filed some comments on some technical specifications around that last week. So I think that it's not the case that, we're saying 5G to the exclusion of all other technologies, but, as Tom said, I think it is important to recognize that when it comes to, what we don't know, we know that innovation will follow these capabilities. So when you make, much, faster speeds, lower latency, more reliability, the ability to connect far more devices, the ability to crunch, the capacity to crunch far more data, there will be innovation that follows that. And I would say, one of the areas that still needs to have attention drawn to it, and the FCC is focused on this, hard at work on it, is releasing more mid-band spectrum. And, the U.S. has lagged other countries in that regard. And when you look at the fact, I think by 2020, CTIA predicts that other countries will have 4 times the amount of mid-band spectrum. That's an area that's important because mid-band has both the benefit of capacity and coverage. And when we talk about, closing the digital divide from providing access to networks, that's an important piece of the puzzle that I don't think we should be waiting on. We should be moving expeditiously. 1, because of the digital divide. 2, because the global competition there is fierce, and we all know that 5G is going to need a mix of high, mid, and low band spectrum to be successful.
So we're going to have a big drop-down fight about C-band tomorrow, mid-band. But what other opportunities are we missing for mid-band? Tom, what are some obstacles that we should be dealing with?
Well, certainly, spectrum allocation is front and center. And, there are a lot of network security issues where collaboration and, industry, government cooperation is important. But, right now, we have a lot of things on the agenda, which is good. Some of the progress we've made in the last few decades in freeing up the use of radio spectrum. It is remarkable in the 1980s, and after a 30-year plus fight to get allocation for cellular. We started out with 40 to 50 megahertz. 40 became 50 pretty soon in the 1980s, and so now we're at something over 700 megahertz, and that's pretty good. Finland, the Finnish regulator, says they have 1,200 megahertz, not counting the ultra, the millimeter wave bands. But we can see that in some sense we're falling behind. Whenever you have these discussions, every person from a different country knows in their own heart that they're falling behind. We're all falling behind. These are the way these things go, right? You're falling behind in the UK, aren't you? Yeah.
Except
So
for
we're
Finland.
all falling behind, and we can do better.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
But I think the first thing you said, did you say that
Yeah.
that we've made progress on mid-band?
Yeah.
And that we're in pretty good shape on mid-band?
No. I mean, I'm saying we have triggered a lot of interest, including, for example, this C-band, 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz allocation you're talking about tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we're getting proposals and pressure on regulators from private sector interests that think there's a more efficient way to use regulation that involves flexibility, I think that's great progress. I think it's great progress that we can use the millimeter wave bands that were great experiments in the 1990s, collapsed in the dot-com bust in the early 2000s, rattled around in bankruptcy proceedings, and nobody knew what to do about them, but some research and development took place, and certainly the march of science goes on. And so now they're being used to host very valuable new 5G services. How far that goes, where mobility kicks in, how much mid-band is still, low band and mid-band spectrum still factors in. Those are obviously things that have to be worked out through the competitive process in the market. But I think we have made great progress, and the fact that we're having this discussion tomorrow, and from a proposal filed just 2 years ago, and putting a lot of pressure on regulators, I think that's a very good sign. Now, some of us, and I've worked with Scott on this, but even arguments over 5.9 gigahertz, which was assigned 20 years ago on essentially a license-exempt basis for technologies related to automotive use, DSRC, dedicated short-range communications for automobiles, and that big, nice, beautiful chunk of 75 megahertz, which is now called mid-band, very valuable for 5G. By most accounts, has not lived up to its promise. We have gotten autonomous driving and some great technologies to improve safety of automobiles, but most of those do not really utilize that bandwidth. Would be more dependent on 5G allocations, much more generic. Wi-Fi, which takes place on an adjacent band, has become highly popular, and there's this battle now between Wi-Fi advocates and the auto industry over what to do about this. The fact that we don't have an auction mechanism in place because there are no rights that can be reassigned in the market is really a problem there. And so some of us have had this idea that there might be a way to actually fix that through assigning some rights and having a market process decide how we use that radio spectrum. And that comes in a lot of contexts, including some of the technologies that Dale talked about before, having market mechanisms. I think we've lurched towards that, and we have a lot of progress on it. But it's as I think President Carter said about the Vietnam War, it's an incomplete success.
Rob,
I was actually just going to mention the opportunity that Tom brought up last there at 5.9 gigahertz. Might not be the first thing that people think about when they think about mid-band spectrum, but hugely important. Don't necessarily agree with the solution Tom articulated to freeing it up. I think there could be a much simpler allocation of that spectrum at very low cost, opportunity cost that is, to unlicensed services, allow all comers to innovate in that band. Very important because that's really key to enabling the 10G networks that I've been talking about. Having gigabit plus multi-gig networks is great, but the way everyone experiences that is over Wi-Fi. So we need to have that connection, that last link, be robust, and that 5.9 gigahertz opportunity is the best way to do that in the near term.
Actually, yeah, we should go to questions. Jonathan, wait for the mic.
Just wanted to talk a little bit more about the 5G wireless rollout. I was talking to someone here who works at a cellular, company store, like Glenwood Springs, which is a somewhat bigger town near here. When would Grand Junction get 5G? So the question is, generally, how long? What's the time frame for really rolling out 5G, dense cells in cities that aren't, the top 20, the top 50? Thanks.
So I'll speak about Verizon. We've announced that we're going to roll out 30 cities by the end of the year for mobility, and that we're going to also expand our 5G home, the fixed wireless product as well. We haven't announced any additional cities yet, but I would say, just as a general matter, that we are going to focus first on densely populated areas. That's in part because millimeter wave spectrum is, well, two reasons. One, we're going first to where the demand is. And of course, the greatest demand are in densely populated areas, not surprisingly, downtown areas. And then offshoot of that would be suburban areas. And then beyond that, a lot of what will be informing the timing is just how quickly can we go. We're rolling out, deploying about, I think, 1,200 to 1,400 route miles of fiber every month now. And we're working in cities and towns across the country. And that takes time. There are a lot of stakeholders that are involved in making the decisions. Obviously, local communities, local elected officials. But even when you get the approvals, you're really talking about a construction project. So you're digging up the ground, you're laying the fiber. So this is going to be a 3 to 5 year build out, but we are working as quickly as we can. Part of the timing will depend on how quickly we can get approvals for the infrastructure siting process.
Let's continue on that theme with digital divides. And some people worry that it'll exacerbate a divide. Some people say that this will help solve digital divides. But I don't understand why the incentives to invest are any different with 5G than with anything else, than with other Gs. So why do we expect this has anything to do with the digital divide? And that why would the problems that we face with 5G be different from the problems we face today? Are they actually separate issues?
Well, I think you're going to have to deal with the underlying issue, whether you're talking 4G or 5G. The underlying issue is that in sparsely populated rural areas, it is very expensive to deploy the network. So the reality is that we are ultimately going to have to deal with those challenges. And I think the solution is going to have to involve a framework that has 3 components. 1, some public funding to help defray the cost. 2, policies that incent and reduce the cost of private deployment, because that means you're going to need less public funding the more you can incent and support private investment. And 3, and we don't talk about this a lot, but we're going to need some real focus on not just access, but adoption, because many studies now show that a lot of the digital divide now is not just access to the networks, but why are people not adopting even when they have access? And so we need some real focus on that.
Other questions? Yeah, Blair.
I understand where 5G creates use cases in the enterprise market, but what I don't really get is where are in the mass market, what are the use cases, and particularly what are those use cases which gigabit Wi-Fi doesn't already do? So in other words, what are the really new use cases as opposed to benefits to the enterprises or the wireless companies on the basis of capacity, cost structure, et cetera, but from the new use cases?
Yeah, I think certainly we're going to see the most disruptive in the short-term use cases on the enterprise side. But on the consumer side, in part, because these devices already are really good and people are very pleased with them, it may be harder to see, but I think there will be enhancements to things like video conferencing, video chatting. There'll be increased speed on downloading 4K movies, for example. Something that would take 7 minutes today will take seconds.
I don't want to interrupt you, but my point is, can't we already do that on gigabit Wi-Fi?
I think there will be enhancements to AR and VR yet to be determined that we can't do today. So it's not that you can't do some of these things today. I think the real question is, what will be the enhancements? So for example, we're working with a number of companies to collaborate to figure out how to use the increased capabilities that 5G will allow. So for example, with the New York Times, with news gathering, how can we have real-time coverage in a way that doesn't harm reporters. Maybe there'll be dangerous situations that you'll want to have coverage on quicker. Or we've partnered with a company called Medivise, which is looking at how do you take, for cancer treatments, 2D imaging that we have today. We have MRIs and X-rays. But for a surgeon, you're still having to look at a 2D image to then go to a 3D patient to try to do surgery to detect, do I have all of that tumor cut out? And so using holographic images that 5G is going to enable because of the super fast speed and the enabling of artificial intelligence to bring together an image on top of that brain when the surgeon can more precisely and not just sort of using his mind's eye extrapolation from the 2D image. So I think part of the answer is real consumers will benefit. Some of that will be obviously from consumer entertainment type of use cases, but others of that will be, I think, with enhanced telemedicine, enhanced education. I think it was mentioned on the last panel for low-income students who will never have parents who take them to Europe to be able to experience some of the King Tut's tomb or some of the great marvels in Europe. These things, because of enhanced augmented reality and virtual reality, will make it as though the student were there. So I think there will be consumer benefits in a variety of ways.
Yeah, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Blair brings up good and straightforward questions. What are the use cases? And certainly in the investment community, that is the issue. But in terms of the advanced forecasts on these things, I go back to circa 2005. The techie meme was that cellular networks were completely uninteresting. The only application that had done anything was ringtones, and that was a non-Japanese view where the wireless web had taken off 1999 with iMode, and they had an active ecosystem. But everywhere else, we were just kind of waiting for something to happen. And boy, I mean, did it happen? And
Your memory of history is different than mine. What I would say, this is true for both gigabit networks and 5G, we are building networks
For the first time that provide more abundant bandwidth than we know what the use case are. In going from 3G to 4G, we knew that video would be the major use, and it has been the major use. And that's really why there were other uses that came up in terms of things like Uber and other things. But the primary use of the data was well known.
Well, yeah, but hang on a second. By the way, some of our memories are different. Some of them are similar from Northridge Junior High School a few years back. But in 2007, we started on the streaming gambit, and so by the time 4G comes into the market, it's just linear extrapolation. More, faster, better. Well, this is what Donna says: more, faster, better. She's trying to give you some of the things they're thinking about now in deployment terms, but we're going to have to get more, faster, better to find out exactly what does play out. And I think, I mean, what I take from your question too about why can't we do this on this other network sort of now or soon, I think that's a great point. There's technological competition we're looking at, and we're going to look at the fixed and the mobile. The intermodal competition is going to be very exciting. I mean, Hugh says we've already dropped down in the United States to about 20% of households are smartphone only. And that's obviously 4G in a 4G world, and it's very exciting to see where this plays out. We're seeing the other side of this with cable saying, oh yeah, we're not yesterday's news. We're jumping ahead with our 10G program. I think there'll be these wonderful opportunities coming up. One of which will be, what are we going to do with satellite television spectrum? Because that's going away, satellite television services, for obvious and already apparent reasons. But satellite broadband, maybe it should actually, in the opinion of many of us who've looked at the digital divide and universal service, it become more of a part of the rural deployment question. It'll immediately be pointed out that, well, satellite may not be the solution on some of the 5G applications. But again, we don't really know what those applications are going to be and how profoundly different. And in fact, these are the kinds of opportunities that we should welcome and not resist because of the unknowables at this point. So,
Was there a question? back there. I thought Joey. Okay. Yeah, true. Hold on. Wait a second.
This has been the best part of the session, this back and forth on this point. Let me just drive it a little further. What are the costs going to be? Sorry?
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Oh. It's well framed, right? You laid the table right. But could we just speak the costs of your 5G services that already exist, and how are they going to be priced in these 30 cities you've spoken about? And why would a consumer go to that if the price is higher, or is it going to be lower? Could you just talk about the pricing versus 4G? And I'd actually love, Rob, your perspective on this too, and this discussion that just took place. Do you agree that a lot of these uses are really just as easily done on gigabit Wi-Fi networks?
So maybe I'll just quickly say I completely agree that network innovation and deployment is ahead of application innovation. And that's, from our perspective in the cable industry, a good place for us to be. Right, we want to put those networks out there and see what happens. We have some ideas. Donna mentioned a few of them, of what might fill those pipes in the future. It's very much in our interest to encourage that innovation and encourage the continued rollout of these next generation networks. I won't comment on the price issue, though.
Yeah.
I'll leave that to you.
So I'll speak to, obviously, you're talking about consumer prices, and then I want to go back to enterprise use cases, because we haven't spent a ton of time on that. So what we've done, we have the fixed 5G home product, and we priced that at $50 for existing Verizon customers and $70 a month for new non-Verizon customers. So I think that's hugely important for a competitive alternative to many consumers, and I think that the reality is that we haven't talked about that as a consumer use case, but it certainly is a consumer benefit to have that competitive choice in those cities. So on the mobile side, we've charged an additional $10 for 5G, and ultimately the market will determine whether or not that's right. From our point of view, we've worked for years on building out and deploying the underpinnings of 5G, and the reality is we're providing greater value when we provide 5G versus 4G. So, it's not just speed and latency, it's reliability, it's increased energy efficiency, it's longer battery life, it's the ability to have far more devices connected. I mean, our CEO talks about this as the 8 currencies of 5G. It's simply the 8 different capabilities. So it's a greater value, and to your point as to, what will adoption be in advance of use cases, that will, I think, evolve as the use cases evolve, but certainly I think there will be, the test will be in the marketplace. But I think, to the use cases point, we often talk about, enterprise versus customers, but I think it's really important to look at how consumers are going to benefit from a lot of the disruptive changes that enterprise use cases will help enable. So we haven't talked about smart city solutions and greater efficiency and smart parking. Those of you who live in Washington, D.C. know that that's a challenge. Smart traffic, smart lighting. So all of that suite of use cases will certainly impact how we live, work, and play. And we could go on. We could talk about smart agriculture or smart manufacturing. All of these things will be enhanced by faster speeds, the ability to have mobile edge computing, the ability to crunch far more larger, massive amounts of data. So we could spend a lot of time on that.
Catherine.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some of the experience in the UK on pricing, because I think that's quite salutary. So obviously we launched our 5G mobile products in June, and we launched that at a £5 premium, more or less like for like compared with the 4G product, for exactly the same reasons that Donna outlined, because we think it offers more value to the consumer. Pretty much immediately in response to that, our 2 main competitors launched a very similar product. We would argue not quite as good, but nevertheless, in the eyes of the consumer, pretty similar, at a 0 premium compared to the 4G product. So I think, there may be more value there for the consumer, but your ability to monetize that, regardless of what use cases you can come up with, depends on the competitive dynamic. And I think in the UK, that might be interesting. And then I think the other point on pricing in the UK, and I don't know how many of you have had a look at the BBC News website this morning, but there's an interesting piece there because we have a mobile network in the UK 3, which is Hutchison owned. And for various reasons due to historical acquisitions, they have found themselves with quite a nice chunk of 5G spectrum. And their competitive strategy is actually to use that to enter the fixed wireless home broadband market, which they've just launched. Now, they've launched that with a 250 meg home broadband product in certain parts of London at £35 per month, which is actually comparatively cheap compared to the equivalent speeds in a fixed package. But of course, the problem, and this is the problem that the BBC is reporting on today, is that the customer experience isn't that great. The actual user experience is a little flaky. So actually, people who are paying less, and you can get a 40 meg broadband fixed product in the UK right now for about £25 per month, are actually going to face a choice between a 5G product that might be £10 more expensive than a perfectly good fixed wireless product. So I think my 2 points really are that your ability to monetize on price is going to depend on the quality of the actual user experience and on the competitive dynamic in the market.
Does anyone want to address the Sprint T-Mobile question that's here on Slido? It keeps climbing up the list.
No takers.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Okay. I think we could do one last question if we want, otherwise. Okay, well then, thanks very much to the panel for an interesting discussion. And we will next have lunch, which will be just across there, right? Instead of outside because it's too hot. And Jaron Lanier will do a keynote talk after we are all settled. What?